Hello, Ted. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me again.
And Ted, I want to thank you for doing the podcast. I haven't done a show in a while, and so I'm really excited to be spotlighting creatives again. And so if you don't know Ted, he has been featured on our podcast before on episode 14, so it's pretty cool to have him be a returning guest. I'm a super huge fan of Ted's work, and if this is the first time you have heard of Ted, he is a book artist, a book excavator, and his type of creativity I rarely come across on social media. So I'm excited to have him on here again. And before we start, Ted, please tell everybody where they can learn more about you or connect with you.
Sure thing. My easiest, where I publish the most, is either Facebook or Instagram, and both of them would be at Ted Wray Artist. And I do have a YouTube channel. It's embarrassingly low traffic, but youtube.com/Ted Wray. That's WRAY. I'd love to see more views on my YouTube channel, but I just don't have that much savvy on how to grow I'm just plugging away, making videos and publishing my work, and very slowly the YouTube following is growing. Of course, I'm on Twitter too, and that's also even more embarrassingly small, but Instagram and Facebook, really. Facebook.com/Ted Wray Artist, Instagram.com/Ted Wray Artist, TEDWRAY.
Great. And listeners, connect with Ted, and I appreciate if you hit the subscribe and like button for his show. Ted, I mentioned in the intro that you were on episode 14 of our podcast. And listeners, I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode because we really deep dived into his background, both as a musician and as an artist. As a returning guest, we're not going to focus on his background as much as we did before, but more about his art and his process. But Ted, so that being said, for those who may be discovering you for the first time, can you just tell us about your particular art that you specialize in? I said book excavation. I said book artist. In your own words, explain to people what kind of art you do.
Sure. Within book sculpting, which is probably brand new to a lot of your listeners, there's a subgenre called book excavation art. And that's the best way to put it. Basically, I'm putting a blade to books and I'm making aesthetic decisions as I go, only removing things. I don't add anything except I glue it when I'm done. But all of the color, all of the imagery that you see was already in the book when I started. And let me sort of relieve some concerns. I know a lot of people are concerned about how could you do that to a book? All of these books that I get are bound for recycling. All of the books that I cut up. Very often they're already damaged, but you can't see that because I'm removing, a child's crayon marks and stuff like that in the book. But I get them at thrift stores. I get them on eBay really cheap. And as cheap as I get them, you know that they're not going to warehouse them at that price forever. So, and I also get them from a friend of mine who runs a used bookstore, and she knows that she can't sell she has no market for some of these books. So she passes them on to me. And if I can use them, I do. Okay, I'm going back to your initial question. Yes, I'm a book excavation artist, which just means I put a blade to the book. And hopefully I'm revealing something more interesting than just the book as it was before I started. And giving it, sort of in a sense, I'm resurrecting books from the dead and giving them eternal life.
You really have to see Ted's work. I mean, this podcast may not even make sense unless you see it because it's so mind-boggling that I want to ask you, what are the typical responses from people since your work isn't traditional, like using a paintbrush or a canvas? Is there a challenge in educating people on this particular unique medium?
Sure. It's definitely a visual medium, to try to explain it verbally. The best I can try, but we'll try that later if we need to. Ask me the question again because I had my head around the answer.
I mean, I think people understand, artists use paintbrush. They use paint and a canvas, but you excavate a book. And What's the challenge in educating people on this medium, and where the artistry even falls within what you do?
Sure. Bear with me while I get my head around it. I think that you started the question with what do I hear most often from viewers? And the by far the most often heard thing is, I've never seen anything like it. And I love that response, and I'm tired of that response. I have to be grateful and gracious and humble. It's interesting because I do hear the same thing over and over and over, and I kind of expect people to have already heard it, but how could they? Obviously, my reach isn't very large. So, and there are other book sculptors. I didn't invent this. I just have my own particular fingerprint on it. One of the ways I would try to explain it, if I had to verbally, is, I cut a window into the cover of the book, and then that cover becomes the frame for the next page, and each page becomes the frame for each subsequent page. That would probably be the easiest way to explain it. Now, that doesn't exactly paint the picture. I've done a few Q&As, and they're some of them are on YouTube. It's funny how I can't think of any particular questions that are typical. Generally, what happens is I don't have the composition end results in my head, because there's so much imagery in the books. Unless I was to map it out, say with tracing paper, and try to align everything perfectly, I don't know how it's going to fall. And another thing, so it's very spontaneous. It's a surprise. I do preview the book. I get to see what I'm likely to keep, but that doesn't guarantee I'm going to keep it. I may have already covered it up with something else that I like. Sometimes that happens, and I go back and I remove because I'm covering up something I like even more. So, but other times something I really wanted to keep is already being blocked by something that I definitely am committed to keeping. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Absolutely. And you're going into your process, and forgive me because I'll ask the same question where you've already answered it
That's
a little bit now. But let's go back to what you said earlier, because I follow you on Instagram, and I urge people to follow you on Instagram. And I saw in one of your posts, you were speaking to a group of people in an art gallery about your work. And what was that experience like to speak to a crowd? Because a lot of people have not done that. That's a pretty unique experience. And what's the best part of talking to people about who are curious about your work?
Well, the best thing is when they're interested, and okay, so a lot has happened since our first podcast, right? Because you interviewed me, I think it was in December of 2020, right?
Correct.
So immediately after that, I entered my first juried show, and got a blue ribbon there in the 3D category. And at that gallery, it's a local gallery here in Ellijay, Georgia. It's called Gilmer Arts. And they like my work, so they offered me a solo show. So I had a solo show here in July. I had 53 pieces, and it was really, really nice to see my work presented really elegantly, professionally. And they gave me total freedom to set it up the way I wanted, so it was a real joy. My girlfriend, Angie, was really helpful. I couldn't have done it without her. It's funny because I have videos, stop motion of us setting it up. And I have 3 different edits of the stop motion that I'm going to do. One, she's doing all the work, and I just pop in now and then, and I point, give direction. And then I step off the scene, and she's working. She's hustling around the gallery. Another video I'm going to do is the opposite, where I'm hustling around and Angie comes in now and then, and she's just kind of goofing off. And then I'm going to have it's like her story, my story, the truth, and the both of us working. But it's just a clever little funny thing. I realized I got off task here.
No, question. But were you? No, that's great. And I was going to ask you, is that nerve-wracking to be in front of that much people asking about your work?
Well, I was a professional musician for 20 years, and I enjoy speaking to people face to face. I miss, because of COVID, I miss the interaction Although, I left that line of work, so I might have missed the interaction anyway, COVID or not. I enjoy talking to people who are interested in what I'm interested in. It could be anything, but it happens to be about my work. I'm very proud of my work. And everyone who was at that talk, that was for the Gilmer Fine Artists Guild. So they all knew my work, and they came to hear about the process. And they're all really talented artists. They, painters more or less, but I don't think artists. I think true artists recognize other artists regardless of the media. Regardless of the form. So they were really interested in, because like we said, very few people. Now and then I tell people I'm a book excavation artist, and they might be familiar with the work of, say, Brian Detmer or Guy Laramie or James Allen, and there are a few others who are pretty well known. So if I say I'm a book excavation artist, they might say, "Oh, I've seen that before." But then when they actually see an image of my work, they're like, "Yeah, this is not. I've never seen anything like this." It's funny. Now and then I encounter someone who says, "Oh, I know what that is." But then when they see it, they're like, "Oh, I didn't know what that was." And the fact is, that is kind of my mission as an artist. I love it when someone is not surprised by being surprised. Does that make sense?
It does. And the funny thing is, you've mentioned some other book excavators, and it's funny because you do really have your own unique fingerprint in it. It looks completely different. The fact that you, in many ways, found your way to express this form of art that's different than your counterparts is unique. It's very, very different. So let's dive into your process. And for those who hasn't seen his work, like I said, you got to go see it, because now I'm going to dive into his process, and you have to see the visual of his work to understand. But how much thought is done before starting an art piece? Meaning, do you have to examine the book and look through the book's images before making a decision whether or not you can excavate a book?
Sure. Yeah, I'm trying to give an example. I don't, it's not like an artist, a painter will spend a lot of time with a blank canvas contemplating which blank canvas am I going to start, unless they're contemplating size. But yeah, I flip through the books looking for imagery that interests me. My basic criteria is color and imagery. Like I said, I don't know how the result is going to turn out. So I'm not necessarily looking for a theme. I sit with each book before I start it, more or less, because once I start cutting, the cover the first cut may take it upwards of an hour just to get it going. And I've lost steam because subsequent pages didn't interest me. And now and then I'll work with a book that has like a lot of text that I'm not interested in. I'm more interested in the imagery than the text. So I pretty much try to eliminate, unless they are interesting words. You'll see that in some of my work, I have what some people call found poetry. I call them corrupted paragraphs, because I'll leave like a paragraph in there, but I'll edit a lot of it out and totally change the meaning of what the paragraph initially said. However, it is a visual art form. So I don't want to make people work to read. I also don't necessarily want to I don't want my work to be propagandistic. It's not like I want to deliver a message about how you should see the world. Mm-hmm. It's more of an invitation to see the world differently. But yeah, I spend time with the books, and sometimes I'll dig into a book that really turns me off, just to say, how can I do this differently? How can I avoid being stuck? Because I think there's the idea of artist block is sort of a fallacy. You show up and you do the work. Sometimes you like it, sometimes you don't. But a pro, I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Pressfield, but he wrote a book called The War of Art, not the art of war, the war of art. And I think he wrote another one called Turning Pro. And basically what he says is The difference between a pro and a wannabe is the pro shows up and does the work, whether they feel like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the essence of his work, of his book. And he also talks about overcoming resistance. And it's like, you don't need to understand your resistance. You don't need to understand why you're avoiding the work. You just need to stop avoiding the work. Just label it resistance. You don't have to label it fear. You don't have to label it, anxiety or whatever. Just label it resistance and, step up and be a pro. So that's, now and then I'll approach a book like, I really don't like this book, and I'll tackle it. And I may or may not love it, but when I post it, I'm always surprised. There's some books that I absolutely can't stand. Some people love, like, ooh, I really, really like this one. I get a lot of feedback particularly on Instagram. And, it just goes to show that art is subjective, and we already knew that, but it surprises me. It surprises me now and then. And some of the work that I really love, is received really lukewarm. And the thing about being a pro is you don't let that discourage you. You get right back to work. I'm interested in quantity. Of course, I'm very interested in quality. I don't want to do anything that's mediocre. But as soon as I finish a book, I'm ready to start the next one. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to work really since November. I had an event in December that was very time consuming. And, I have an artist residency where I am, and it's going to end in April. So I'm planning my move. So I'm actually my girlfriend has a place about 5 acres in North Carolina, and there's a home on there that needs some fixing up. But so basically I'm taking the next 2.5 months, getting the place habitable and moving in. It's got 3 bedrooms, so I've got plenty of room for living and studio. So it's exciting, but all of my work is on hold until then.
Ted, let me ask you this question, but before I do, if you live in the North Carolina area, I'm sure Ted would welcome anybody reaching out to him and dropping him a note about the art scene and local galleries out there. But going back to this question I have, so I understand you correctly, if you were given 2 of the same books, I can assume both the finished products won't look the same, right?
They could, if I was aiming to do so. In fact, that might be an experiment for the future. How similarly can I make them? I've already done probably 4 or 5 pairs of the same book, and they look totally different. So wow. 5 different projects. In other words, the same book, five how do I articulate this? 2 copies of 5 individual books I've cut, and the results were totally different. You would not write, unless I told you, you had no idea that they were the same book, unless you looked at the spine.
Very interesting. And now I know I have mentioned this to you on conversations we've had outside of the show, but I love when you cut into a book and that book is about a particular artist. For instance, you recently showed us on Instagram that you were working on a book on the famous mathematical artist M.C. Escher. This one got me really excited when you posted this. Why did you choose him as a subject?
I think it was inevitable. I'm going to go back a little bit into my history. When I was in high school, I used to draw some really bizarre stuff, mostly black and white sketching. And a fellow student named Lisa Franzen saw some potential in my work. She turned me on to Escher. She bought me an Escher book. I think I was a freshman. I think she was a senior, if memory serves. But so I got turned on to Escher when I was in like 9th grade. And of course, his work is mind blowing. And I think it was just inevitable. Now, another thing that brought that piece of work into fruition was there's a publisher called Taschen, Taschen. I believe it's a German company. And they do a lot of art books. And they have a series called Portfolio, where they have a portfolio of about 14 images by the same artist. And I did a Dali one in the past of one of these books. Basically, they're removable, frameable prints. So it's a 11 inch by 14 inch. Some of them are landscape, in other words, wide, and some of them are portrait, in other words, tall. With the Escher one, I removed all of the, I'm trying to recall, I removed all of the landscape ones and cut all the portrait ones. So there were about 10 images. And so basically, if I'm working with 10 images, what was page 1 now becomes page 11 after I cut through it. This is hard to articulate.
Absolutely. But it's mind-boggling to see, for sure. I love it.
So I cut page 1 like a frame, right? And I removed the inside. And then I put it behind the book. And then I continue cutting and remove the page I just finished cutting and put it behind the whole thing. So these 10 pages are repeated 5 or 6 times over and over. And, I'm dealing with a dwindling scrap of paper at the end of it all because I keep cutting the same page over and over and over. Keep cutting more out of the interior. And yeah, I did a Dali book like this a while back, and that's in the collection of a guy named John Tillman. He's in Florida. He's an art collector and a musician, really good guy. I'm glad to know him. I'm delighted that he likes my art enough to have purchased some. When I made that book, I added spacers between the pages, but they weren't all that deep. Now with the Escher one that you've seen, I've added a piece of foam core board between each layer. Foam core board is 3/16 of an inch, and this is now 60 layers deep. I'm sorry, I think it's 56 or 54 layers deep. So we're looking at about somewhere between 14 to 18 inches deep, this Escher book. I haven't been able to work on it in several weeks. I'm walking over to it now. It's about 14 inches deep. It's going to be, well, spectacular, if I may say so.
Yeah, I would definitely agree to that. There was a lot of engagement in that post. I particularly was really excited because it was inevitable with your work being, cut into and has 3D elements, and then you take the mathematical art of Escher. It just makes sense that you were going to do a book excavation on Escher. So let me understand it right. You're not done yet, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people interested in that when that's completed.
Right. I'm not done. Like I said, I repeated cutting 10 pages about 6 times each. Now, each of those were mounted onto foam core and meticulously aligned before mounting them to the foam core, so that basically the foam core is in a stack with you're looking down into it as it is now, and the layers that I cut are all aligned perfectly, but I haven't assembled them. They're just basically individual. They're kind of like individual mat boards. With it's a shame our this podcast isn't on video. We might think about that in the future because I could explain it much better. But basically, they haven't been assembled. They're just stacked. I haven't glued them. And there are a few little minor corrections that I'm aware of that maybe no one else would be aware of. But the perfectionist that I am, I want to tweak and fix. But yeah, they have to be mounted and assembled and then protected. So it's going to be a shadow box that's about 16 inches deep, And one thing I learned from doing this piece, Escher has a piece called Belvedere, and it's one of the pictures with a building that's like a tower, and people are populating, different portions of the image. This image takes up about 30 to 40% of the real estate of the footprint of the book. And that appears about 3 or 4 layers in. So all of the real depth is hidden behind that. This one page, while you can see around it and through it, I wish that I had waited to cut it much later. I don't know how to articulate this. With the imagery that I kept on it, I'm blocking so much real estate of the subsequent layers that I wish that I had just cut it and then saved some of that real estate for one of the later cuts because it's hard to see around. It's hard to see through. So what I'm going to have to do when I frame it is make the first 1 inch of the book removable from the art. So you can look at it and see, oh, there's more back there, and then remove it. Maybe it's a sliding panel or a door or something, but you remove the first several layers, including the image of the Belvedere, and then you can see all of the complexity behind it. I realize that was a long, convoluted way to say something that may not even communicate.
You know what? I know a lot of people listen to this show on a podcast platform, but we do have a YouTube version. We do post the visuals to your work. So let me ask you this question, because this one in particular, the Escher piece, looks like it was done a little differently than your other pieces. So I know artists like to push the boundaries. What are your thoughts on other ways to push the limits for your work? Because I know this one was a little different. So you may have pushed it on this piece, but do you consciously do that or not?
Well, sure. When I first stumbled across the idea of doing book excavation art, I had 12 years in the printing industry, and I was always thinking about how I can manipulate paper differently. Some of my years in the printing industry were in the binding department. So I was handling paper in a variety of ways, folding and other ways of just finishing the paper. And I try to innovate with every book I touch. If I try not to allow a formula to emerge that I just rely on. This is why, when we talked earlier about, two versions of the same book don't resemble each other at all. I'm really trying to push. If you're asking me specifically, how am I going to push the limits? I don't necessarily know that I want to share a lot of these secrets, because a lot of my technique is hard earned. No one taught me how to do this. It was hard earned trial and error, and I'm not ready to merely just give it away. Maybe sometime in the future, or if I do, like, say, a Patreon course where people are willing to pay for it and I can still keep it private, then I might announce, sort of what makes my style my style. It's interesting because a lot of the other book excavation artists, a few of them I see incorporating, and they mention me, they say, hey, this one's inspired by Ted Wray. And they know what I'm doing, because they're already putting a blade to a book. So it's kind of like, when a musician hears a musician doing something new, it's like, yeah, that's fresh and new, but I know what they did. I don't know if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's like, I know what they did, but I'm glad they came across that innovation. I'm actually in the process of, right now I have a set of books. It's like 15 volumes, something like, paranormal or something like that. But I'm doing my first I'm assembling the books together and excavating more than one book together. I started this a while back, and I'm not going to be able to resume it. It's going to be much larger because it's going to be several books glued together. So it's going to be a standing sculpture that's interesting in and of itself. But then when you get closer to it, it's like, oh, it's been cut. Not only has it been assembled by compiling books together, but then it's been excavated beyond that. So that's kind of a cool thing. I also stumbled across a publisher called Taj, Taj, and they have a series of books that are 18 inches wide by 24 inches tall. And, 1.5 feet by 2 feet. To see the book that big, it's actually bigger than it sounds. The books are actually much larger than an atlas. So it doesn't sound that big, 1.5 feet by 2 feet. But when you see them, it's like, wow, that's huge. And so those are not necessarily innovations, but I'm glad I stumbled across bigger ones. So I'll be doing something like that. I've got lots of ideas for larger scale works. And every book that I work on, I learn something new that I wish I had done differently. And it's kind of funny because I'm almost not embarrassed by my early work, but I wish I could go back and change some of it. But It's kind of like listening to early Paul Simon stuff, when he was a kid writing these things. It's like, it's like, I can't believe he actually published that, because the level of quality that he arrived at through years and years and years of crafting his, honing his craft. It's a similar thing.
And that's why I follow you. I'm looking forward to all this innovation and all the boundaries you're about to push, and I'm looking forward to what that's going to look like. And so let's transition to brand building. What have you learned about building your brand since we chatted last? I noticed there's been more press on you the past year. I saw a piece on you on the Times Courier. Can you speak about what you've learned, since we've spoken last, about building your brand or having more eyes on your work?
Sure. I spent 20 years as a musician in the Tampa Bay area. There were different periods of when I was really promoting myself and when I just sort of sailed, rested on my laurels because I was already established. Then I got tired of being in the public eye so much. That coincided with, I was burnt out, as we discussed in the past. And so I spent a year or two out of the public eye. And it was actually more like one really solid year outside of the public eye before launching my social media campaign. I would just as soon remain anonymous. I don't seek any particular glory or, I'm just not that vain, I don't think. I don't need, don't get me wrong. It's nice to be appreciated and respected and admired for bringing something new. But at the same time, I don't really need, I don't need a certain glory that I see people, aspiring to on social media. It's like my brand, basically my brand is me, and it's tricky because I have a lot of creativity in a lot of different fields. And the book excavation art is probably the most sellable, just because it's so unique and so new and so visually stunning, immediately recognizable as new and fresh and unique. I don't think that other areas of my creativity are of less quality. It's just not quite as obvious to any observer. My brand is, just being me, and I'm always a little concerned that I'm at risk of, being canceled, because I think anyone who's introducing truth and trying to be real is going to be to some degree controversial in the eyes of somebody. And there's so many eyes out there and people are very sensitive. So there's a danger of that, but that's a risk I'm going to have to take. And so be it. My aim is to be as true to myself as I can possibly be.
And with your brand, I can understand the level of maybe trying to educate or really curious people that love art. But what's been your experience even talking to art galleries about your work? Or have you done that yet?
I have some experience with galleries, and it varies quite a bit. Trying to think. A few galleries have approached me online. I'm trying to figure out the best way to hit this question. The first door that I knocked on was the Gilmer Arts here in LJ, and I just stumbled in, and it was bad timing because the manager didn't have the time at that moment. But I showed her some of my work, and I came back a week later and I said, how can I make it really easy for you to want to work with me? And she said, she said, take this application. She just printed it out for me. It was for the juried art show. She said, the deadline is Friday, but for you, we're going to extend it to Tuesday because your work is so unique and interesting. And basically, the way I look at it, I deliver quality, and the appropriate audience is going to recognize that. The real trick is marketing. I don't need everyone in the world to see my work. I just need the right buyers to see my work. I'm happy when more people see my work, and I'm really happy when people who can appreciate it for what it is see my work and engage with me. But not everyone. Not everyone's. Some people just don't get it, and that's fine. That's fine. There's lots of art out there that I don't get.
Let's talk about your buyers, because if anybody would love to purchase one of your one-of-a-kind art pieces, these book excavations, how do they typically do this?
Okay, so my most recent sales have been mostly from social media. Yeah, pretty much all of my sales have been from social media, except for in December, there was an event that I was invited to participate in Florida. And it was like a 6-hour winter market. And I went down to Florida with about 20 pieces. And in the 6-hour event, I sold 5 then and there. They were all people who knew me from Tampa Bay as a musician and stayed friends on social media and then saw my new career. And then someone who didn't know me saw my work there. And it's interesting because you and I talked about commissions last time. He commissioned me. His father is retiring from Ripley's, believe it or not, after 40 years. And Ripley's has a series of books. Well, this gentleman who's retiring worked in various phases at Ripley's, believe it or not, and including bringing the books to market. I don't know exactly what capacity, but that's what I've been told. So anyway, I happened to have had a few Ripley's books, and he asked me, he said, "Hey, can you do a Ripley's book for my dad who's retiring?" And I said, "Well, I have some. I'll cut it. I'll start cutting it. I'll send you progress pics. You tell me how you feel about progress. And if you like the end result, send me a down payment and I'll finish the job and I'll ship it to you." So that happened. So commissions are more likely now than they were, although there's stipulations I'll have to get into. I'm trying to answer your question. I do this a lot. I go down rabbit holes that I don't know how to find my way out of. You asked me, how do people buy my work? Essentially, reach out to me on social media. My webmaster has been waiting for me to deliver to her 2 1-minute videos. Now, I'm so picky with my video. I'm not even that good a video editor. So I'm trying to hone my skills to get her. I sent her one. I don't even know if she knows she received it because I've been out of her orbit for so long. But soon I will have a website up. That will happen this year after I get settled down in North Carolina. Meantime, you can reach me on the social media platforms we mentioned already. Ideally, Facebook and Instagram. I don't have a store organized in such a way that you can just, pick them. Usually what happens is someone sees a piece and says, "Ooh, I really like this one." And if it's not sold, we engage about that purchase. I did have another old friend say, "How can I see your work? I want to buy one." And I said, "I need to organize this stuff anyway. Check your email box." And basically what I was doing was I was sending her like 4 or 5 images at a time saying, these are available immediately. They're in shadow boxes. You can hang them on your wall if you buy them today. So there were different ones, different phases of completion. And basically I sort of sent her a customized catalog. And that's how she made her decision.
We are all looking forward to your website when I'm assuming there is going to be a capability to purchase it directly from your website. But in the meantime, it seems pretty casual. Just reach out to Ted on his social media sites, Instagram, Facebook, and just have a dialogue with him. I can't tell you, in addition to the book itself and how he does his craftsmanship of his book excavation, the way he even displays it on a shadow box, it's just so elegant and striking the way it's all packaged in the end. And I'm sure before sometime in the near future, I'm going to have to get one for myself. So thank you for sharing that with us. And Ted, let me get you your final question. What are your future goals? What would you like to see happen maybe the next year or two?
Well, what's immediately on the horizon, like we said, is I'm moving to North Carolina, and it's going to be a few months before I settle in and set up shop. Launching the website is going to be crucial. I don't know how. Generally, I seem to be really good with 3-year plans. One, I think, is too short, and beyond 3 is too far out. Interestingly, I'm currently also engaged in a. Do you know what? Have you heard of Exquisite Corpse?
No, I haven't.
Okay, Exquisite Corpse is a game that the surrealists used to play. And what they would do is one artist would paint 1/3 of a painting, then he would cover that up, leaving just an indication for where the next artist is going to take over. Another surrealist painter would come in and take over without knowing what's hidden on the painting already. They would paint the middle third and then cover that up, and someone else would come along and finish the bottom. I'm currently in a collaboration with an artist named, I think it's Sophia Elson, and 2 other artists, and we're mailing each other exquisite corpses. Like so far I've drawn like a head, and then I hidden that, put that in the mail, and I received someone else's head that I couldn't see, but they showed me where the neck came down. So I drew a torso. Right. So I drew a torso and I just covered that up and sent that out in the mail. And this week I'm working on sort of the waist. And it can be, it can be anything. And we're collaborating blindly. So when we're on section 3 of 4, so in about 2 weeks, we're going to complete the feet, and then we're all going to open them and post them online.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. You are going to post it, like you said, right?
Yeah, I sure will. I've done a bunch of these in the past for years. It was just a happy coincidence that I stumbled across someone who's doing this, nationally. We've got, I think we're mailing them. I'm in Georgia, one's in Ohio, one's in California. I forget what the other one is off the top of my head, but 4 artists throughout the country just mailing a blind collaboration.
That's amazing.
It's called Exquisite Corpse. And I'm going to try to get to the answer to your question. Forgive me, I'm long-winded. My financial planner is always asking me, when are you going to retire? And I'm like, dude, I'm an artist. I'm not going to retire. He doesn't seem to understand. Apparently, he has forms to fill out based on some formula that he needs to calculate. I'm not a traditional character. It's like, I'm never going to retire. Even if I don't do this, my creativity will never end. And I will, it's always been boundless. And if for some reason I can't continue this form, another form will show up just because it always has. I can't not create. I'm delighted that I found something as exciting, both for me and the buyer and the viewer, that is so interesting and engaging. My long-term plan is to do this for as long as I can, till I've, destroyed my hand, or until I die. It's just so. I don't know if you saw my introduction video that I released on my YouTube channel back in February of last year. But, somewhere on there, I say something like, as crazy as it sounds, there's nothing that gets me as excited as cutting books.
I know for myself, I'm looking forward to the website. I'm looking forward to the collaboration work you just mentioned. I'm wishing you luck in settling in North Carolina and in integrating yourself with the art scene there. Ted, want to thank you for sharing with us your creative journey and being the first returning guest. And I've enjoyed you jumping in here. And for everybody else, again, just one more reminder, where can they connect with you again?
Facebook.com/Ted Wray Artist. Instagram.com/Ted Wray Artist. And there are some really interesting things on my YouTube, even though, it doesn't get a whole lot of traffic. Just youtube.com/Ted Wray, TEDWRAY. And, that's basically basically it.
Listeners, please connect with Ted. Reach out to him. Look at his work. Purchase some of his work. Follow him. And thank you again, everybody. Thanks, Ted. Until next time, everybody, take care and bye.
Thanks, everybody. Chris, thank you. It's been a real joy and an honor.
Thank you.